You understand, I've encountered some extraordinary narratives in my lifetime, witnessed some remarkably bold maneuvers, but I likely hold the global record for the most inhospitable return home one could fathom. Envision this: you've been absent from your ancestral ranch, the very land your great-great-grandfather carved from the untamed wilderness, for 3 protracted, demanding years. You're fantasizing about the aroma of pine and earth, the familiar squeak of the porch swing, the immense stretch of open country. Instead, you reach the crest of the final incline only to discover an entire, genuine suburban subdivision where your valued longhorn cattle once roamed. Precisely 138 houses, to be accurate. Then, to place the most bizarre embellishment on this nightmarish scenario, imagine the central figure of this land appropriation, a woman whose countenance I'd never encountered, possessing the audacity to summon the police on me, accusing me of trespassing on my own property. This narrative, my acquaintances, is certifiably unbelievable. And you will want to absorb every single detail of how it transpired and how the self-proclaimed monarch of this pilfered domain received exactly her due. My time away had not been a leisurely break. Far from it. My younger sister, Clara, had received a diagnosis of an uncommon autoimmune disorder, and the sole specialists capable of providing experimental treatment were situated in a research institution in Switzerland. She required a constant advocate, an individual to oversee her care, navigate the complex medical system, and, quite honestly, just to be there for her. Our parents were no longer living, and I was her only support. Consequently, I packed my belongings, made arrangements for a reliable, seasoned ranch hand, Tom, to monitor the barn, and devoted myself to Clara's recuperation. Communication proved inconsistent. The clinic was nestled in a secluded valley, and my attention was wholly dedicated to Clara. Tom, bless his soul, was more adept with a branding iron than a mobile phone, and his infrequent, concise letters assured me that all remained tranquil on the western front. Coyotes are bold. Rain's been good, fences holding, and similar remarks, nothing to suggest a small urban area was materializing on my southern pasture. 3 years later, with Clara in remission and at last robust enough for travel, I was en route home, my heart a peculiar blend of weariness and keen expectation. I had even purchased a new Stetson in Houston, prepared to re-engage with my life. The final segment of the route to the barn is a county-maintained dirt path that meanders through undulating hills. As I negotiated the well-known ruts, I perceived that the air felt altered, heavier, and there was a subtle, unidentifiable hum. Then I saw it, or more accurately, what I failed to see. The old weathered barn ranch sign, the one my grandfather had crafted, was absent from the turnoff. In its stead stood a ridiculously opulent faux stone archway adorned with gold-painted lettering that declared Whispering Oaks Estates and a community. A chill coursed through me. Whispering Oaks. My oaks, the ancient trees down by Miller Creek. They didn't whisper, they thundered in the wind. This had to be an error, some monumental surveyor miscalculation. I drove through the archway, my old pickup truck feeling like an invading war machine in a territory of newly laid asphalt and identical beige houses with disconcertingly verdant lawns. Each possessed a small picket fence, a 2-car garage, and a disturbingly cheerful mailbox. This wasn't merely a house or two, it was an extensive development that stretched as far as my eyes could perceive, directly over the ground where my branding corral had once been. My stomach twisted. This was my property, my great-great-grandfather's property. I parked near what appeared to be a community clubhouse, a larger, even more conspicuously beige structure. My hands were trembling as I exited the vehicle. Before I could even assimilate the sheer magnitude of the transgression, a golf cart driven with alarming velocity and precision sped towards me. At its controls was a woman who seemed to have been poured into a lime green pantsuit. Her blonde hair was lacquered into a formidable helmet. Oversized sunglasses concealed her eyes, and a clipboard was clutched to her chest like a protective shield. "May I assist you?" she snapped, her voice saturated with the type of authority that presupposes it will never be challenged. She scrutinized me from head to toe. My dusty jeans and worn boots clearly failed to meet the Whispering Oaks attire standards. I drew a deep breath. "Yes," I replied, my voice surprisingly firm. "You can inform me as to what in the Sam Hill is transpiring. This is my ranch." "The barn." Her lips, painted a garish shade of coral, contorted into a sneer. "I believe you are mistaken. This is Whispering Oaks Estates, and you, sir, are trespassing. I am Beverly Dion, president of the Homeowners Association." "Beverly," I uttered, the name tasting like something acrid. "I don't care if you are the Queen of Sheba. This land, all of it, belongs to me. I possess the deeds, the surveys, the property tax receipts dating back a century." She actually let out a laugh, a brief, sharp noise like a yapping poodle. Oh, I hardly think so. We procured this land equitably. It was deserted, uncared for. We have enhanced it. Now, I must request that you depart or I will contact security and the police. That was the breaking point. The absolute unadulterated effrontery. Ma'am, I stated, my voice dropping to a low rumble, you have constructed a town on my property. You are the one who will encounter issues with the police, not I. Her expression hardened. That's it. You've brought this upon yourself. She extracted a diamond-encrusted smartphone and dramatically jabbed at the screen. Yes, police? I have a belligerent individual trespassing at Whispering Oaks Estates. He is uttering threats. Claims he possesses the place. Yes, dispatch someone immediately. She snapped the phone shut, a smug little smile gracing her lips. They will arrive any moment. Then we shall determine who owns what. The hum I had detected earlier was the distant wail of sirens. They were already nearby. Excessively so. It was as if she had them on speed dial or perhaps on retainer. The situation was rapidly descending into the surreal, and I had a sinking premonition that this Beverly Diant was merely the garishly attired tip of a very substantial, very corrupt iceberg. The initial patrol vehicle, lights flashing, was already passing through that absurd stone archway. The two officers who emerged from the cruiser appeared as though they would rather be anywhere else. One was more senior, heavier set, with a fatigued expression that implied he had witnessed his share of HOA conflicts. The other was younger, taller, attempting to convey an air of sharp authority but mostly looking perplexed by the sight of me, my dusty pickup, and the enraged woman in lime green who was now practically quivering with indignation beside her golf cart. Officers, thank heavens you've arrived, Beverly effused, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. This man is trespassing. He drove straight in here, making outlandish assertions that he owns all of Whispering Oaks. He is clearly disturbed and potentially hazardous. I remained composed, leaning against the fender of my truck. Good evening, officers, I said. My name is Arthur McCoy, and this lady, I gestured towards Beverly, is accurate about one thing. I do assert ownership of all of Whispering Oaks because Whispering Oaks appears to be constructed squarely on my ranch, the Barm Ranch, which has been in my family for 5 generations. The older officer, a Sergeant Miller according to his name tag, sighed. Ma'am, he addressed Beverly, do you possess any documentation pertaining to the HOA's ownership of this land? Beverly scoffed. Naturally, we do. It is all registered with the county. This vagrant is merely attempting to incite trouble. She fumbled in a comically oversized handbag, extracting various items, a half-eaten protein bar, a dog-eared copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War for Middle Management, and finally a sheaf of papers secured by a sparkly pink binder clip. She thrust them at Sergeant Miller. Here, the incorporation documents for the HOA, the development plans sanctioned by the County Planning Commission, everything. I, in response, walked to my truck's cab and fetched the worn leather satchel that held my most crucial documents. The original land patent signed by the governor, successive deeds meticulously recorded, my grandfather's hand-drawn survey maps cross-referenced with official county plat statements, all paid in full for the entirety of the acreage now purportedly known as Whispering Oaks. I handed them to the younger officer, Officer Ramirez. Here is my proof of ownership, officer, including continuous tax payments and a clear chain of title extending back to 1887. I would be exceedingly interested to see how Ms. Diant's paperwork supersedes these. Sergeant Miller was frowning as he perused Beverly's documents. Officer Ramirez, conversely, was handling my historic papers with a surprising measure of care, his eyes widening slightly as he absorbed their age and apparent genuineness. Beverly was tapping her foot impatiently. Well, are you going to apprehend him or not? He is clearly a swindler. Sergeant Miller looked up, his expression inscrutable. Ms. Diant, this development plan, it references a plot number. And these HOA documents, they assert ownership through a quitclaim deed from a Mr. Silas Blackwood. My blood turned to ice, then to fire. Silas Blackwood, my great-uncle, who had passed away nearly 20 years prior, childless, and whose modest, separate parcel of land adjoined my main ranch to the far north, miles from this location. He had never owned a single square inch of the south pasture. Silas Blackwood, I interjected, stepping forward. My great-uncle Silas. He has been deceased for 2 decades, and his parcel was a small 20-acre plot way up near Coyote Ridge. This constitutes hundreds of acres of my primary holding. Beverly waved a dismissive hand. Details. It was all part of the Blackwood estate, unclaimed, undeveloped. We revitalized it. Sergeant Miller exchanged a glance with Officer Ramirez, who then showed him one of my survey maps, clearly demarcating the boundaries of the main barn ranch, starkly different from the small, distant Blackwood plot. The older officer's frown deepened. He then retrieved his own radio. "Dispatch, can you perform a check on a Beverly Diant? Possible outstanding warrants or priors for, let's say, fraud or filing false reports." Beverly's jaw dropped. Her face, beneath the heavy makeup, transformed from a smug pink to a mottled white. "How dare you? I am a respected community leader. I will have your badges for this." "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller stated, his voice suddenly as hard as nails. "Mr. McCoy here has presented compelling, historically consistent documentation of ownership for this specific tract of land. Your documents appear to reference a different, much smaller parcel. And the name on your quitclaim deed is that of a man he claims is deceased and who, according to Mr. McCoy's records, never owned this primary tract. Filing a false police report is a serious offense. Making false claims to property to the extent of facilitating what appears to be a multi-million-dollar construction project on potentially stolen land is significantly more serious." Just then, his radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice was distinct. "Sergeant Miller, subject Beverly Diant has 2 outstanding bench warrants in the neighboring county. One for failure to appear on a charge of embezzlement from a previous community beautification fund, and another for, get this, aggravated identity theft." Beverly Diant emitted a small, choked sound. It was the noise of a poodle finally comprehending it had initiated a confrontation with a grizzly bear. "Officers," I said softly, "I believe this woman not only summoned you here under false pretenses, but has also committed a massive fraud against me and potentially against everyone who purchased a house in this estate." Officer Ramirez was already in motion, retrieving a pair of handcuffs. "Beverly Diant," he announced, his voice now firm and devoid of its earlier hesitation. "You are under arrest for the outstanding warrants. You have the right to remain silent." Beverly commenced wailing, a truly operatic display of outraged innocence that persuaded absolutely no one. "This is a travesty, a misunderstanding. My lawyer will hear about this. You cannot do this to me." As Officer Ramirez expertly cuffed her and led her, stumbling and protesting, towards the patrol car, Sergeant Miller turned to me. "Mr. McCoy, this is one for the record books. We cannot resolve a civil land dispute here and now, but based on your documentation and Ms. Diant's rather colorful history, you are certainly not trespassing. Her claim that you are appears baseless, to put it mildly. In fact, her call to us seems to have backfired rather spectacularly on her." He shook his head. Embezzlement and aggravated ID theft figures. My mind was reeling. 138 houses, a fraudulent quitclaim deed from my deceased great-uncle, an HOA president who was apparently a career criminal. This wasn't merely a problem, it was a cataclysm. As they drove Beverly away, her indignant shrieks diminishing into the otherwise tranquil evening, I looked around at the silent, identical houses. What in God's name had transpired here? And what was I to do now? The initial step was evident. I retrieved my phone and dialed my lawyer, Martin Craighoff, a man whose hourly fee was formidable but whose courtroom success rate was legendary. "Martin," I said when he answered, "it's Arthur McCoy. You are not going to credit this. I need you urgently. It appears someone has stolen my ranch and erected a small city on it while I was absent." There was an extended pause. Then Martin's voice, as dry as desert dust, "Arthur, have you been consuming alcohol, or did you perhaps sustain a head injury?" "I wish, Martin. I genuinely wish." The reality was far more bizarre than any intoxicated phantasm. Martin Craighoff, despite his initial incredulity, was an individual who comprehended the inviolability of property rights with an almost devotional zeal. When I elaborated, his tone transitioned from amused skepticism to icy wrath. "They constructed what? On the barn?" "Arthur described this Beverly Diant to me." I provided him with a detailed portrayal encompassing the lime green pantsuit and the general atmosphere of weaponized ineptitude. "Sounds like a classic charlatan, Arthur, but one with ambition, I'll grant her that. 138 homes. That's not an amateur operation. That's grand larceny on an industrial scale." He instructed me to remain where I was, not to interact with any other HOA officials or residents, and informed me that he would be on the earliest flight the following morning. accompanied by a forensic accounting team and a private investigator he retained for particularly repugnant situations. He also recommended I find a secure location for the night, as my own ranch house, which I could just discern in the distance, perched on its familiar knoll, was now presumably occupied or, at best, part of a crime scene. The irony was not lost on me, a multi-generational rancher barred from his own home by a suburban illusion founded on falsehoods. I ended up at an impersonal motel off the interstate, the sort with bolted-down furnishings and artwork that seemed to have been acquired by weight. Sleep was unattainable. My mind raced, replaying the encounter with Beverly, the arrival of the police, the endless rows of identical houses standing where my cattle ought to have been. How could Tom, my ranch hand, not have become aware? Or if he had, why hadn't he raised a more pressing alarm? His letters had been so terse, so commonplace. The subsequent morning, Martin arrived, a maelstrom of expensive attire and concentrated indignation. He was accompanied by two stern-faced individuals who identified themselves as a forensic accountant named Miss Penelope Albright, whose stare could likely sour milk, and a private investigator, Mr. Jones, a quiet, perceptive man who appeared capable of merging into any environment. Our initial destination was the county records office. Martin, equipped with my deeds and a power of attorney I had signed in the motel lobby, commenced his offensive. The clerks, initially uncooperative and overwhelmed by stacks of documents, soon became attentive under the onslaught of Martin's precisely phrased legal requests. Miss Albright, meanwhile, began retrieving tax records and incorporation filings, her fingers moving rapidly over her laptop keyboard. It did not take long for the primary elements of the fraud to emerge. The quitclaim deed from Silas Blackwood was, indeed, on file. It had been notarized by a Mavis Doolittle, whose notary commission, a swift verification by Jones uncovered, had lapsed 6 months prior to the date on the document. Moreover, the signature for Silas Blackwood was a wavering, unpersuasive scrawl that bore no resemblance to my great-uncle's distinctive, spidery handwriting, examples of which I still possessed on old letters. Forged, Martin declared with grim contentment. Blatantly, incompetently forged. An expired notary. This is progressively improving. Next, the development permits. They had been granted with remarkable swiftness, predicated on the fraudulent deed. The Planning Commission meeting minutes from that time frame were unusually succinct, showing unanimous consent for the Whispering Oaks Estates redevelopment project. The project had been presented by Beverly Diant, representing Blackwood Legacy Holdings LLC, a company established just weeks before the application, with Beverly as the sole managing member. She established a shell corporation, utilized a forged deed to transfer your great-uncle's diminutive, remote parcel to it, then somehow employed that as a pretext to claim ownership or control over your entire south pasture for the development. Martin summarized, shaking his head. The effrontery is astounding, but there's a missing component. How did she persuade the county to believe Blackwood Legacy Holdings owned hundreds of acres based on a forged deed for 20? Mr. Jones, the taciturn investigator, spoke. The chairman of the Planning Commission at that juncture was a man named Herbert Finley. Retired now, resides a couple of towns away, according to local rumor. Finley acquired a sudden, inexplicable partiality for high-stakes poker and Caribbean voyages around the period these permits were expedited. Martin's eyes lit up with a predatory intensity. An enabler or perhaps a co-conspirator. Jones, pay Mr. Finley a visit. Ascertain if his memory can be stimulated. While Jones departed to cajole or intimidate Herbert Finley, Miss Albright was delving into the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA's financials, or what little she could access through public records. It seemed to be a vortex of dubious expenditures and non-transparent transfers. The genuine breakthrough, however, originated from an unforeseen quarter. My ranch hand, Tom. I had been irate and perplexed by his seeming passivity. We drove out to the small cottage on the northern periphery of my property where he resided. He was an elderly man, weathered and stooped, and when he saw me, his eyes filled with a combination of relief and contrition. "Mr. Arthur," he stammered. I attempted to inform you, but they what, Tom?" I inquired gently. He elucidated, his voice faltering, that approximately 2 years prior, Beverly Diant and a pair of burly men in suits had appeared. They had brandished some documents he didn't comprehend, spoken of eminent domain and unpaid back taxes on the abandoned Blackwood parcel, and informed him that a new conservatorship was assuming management of that section. They had cautioned him, quite emphatically, to steer clear of the south pasture, implying he would be arrested for trespassing if he meddled. They had even proffered him a caretaker's stipend to monitor the northern boundary, effectively a bribe to remain situated and silent. "They stated you'd forfeited the land, Mr. Arthur?" he said, misery etched on his countenance. "That you weren't returning. They showed me letters. Looked like your signature, asserting you'd authorized it all. More forgeries, sophisticated ones this instance, perhaps." Beverly was more astute than her initial demeanor indicated. Tom, isolated and not legally astute, had been methodically deceived and intimidated. My resentment towards him dissipated, supplanted by a cold wrath directed at Beverly and her associates. He also mentioned the name of the construction firm, Prestige Pinnacle Homes. He had observed their trucks arriving and departing constantly. Martin immediately researched them. Prestige Pinnacle Homes is a substantial regional developer with a generally respectable reputation. They wouldn't knowingly engage in something this dubious, Martin reflected. Beverly must have presented them with a highly persuasive narrative, likely substantiated by those fraudulent deeds and improperly issued permits. They are victims here as well, in a sense. They have invested millions in constructing 138 houses on land to which they do not actually possess rights. He grinned, a predator detecting prey. "Oh, this is exquisite. Not only are we going to sue Beverly and her fictitious HOA into non-existence, but Prestige Pinnacle Homes will possess a massive claim against her for fraud and misrepresentation too. She hasn't merely provoked the bear, she's dynamited the entire grizzly habitat." Miss Albright interjected, "I've cross-referenced the HOA incorporation with Blackwood Legacy Holdings LLC. The initial financing for the LLC appears to have originated from a series of intricate loans secured against, well, it's cyclical. But it seems she was leveraging the anticipated value of the developed lots on your land to secure the initial operating capital for the LLC that purportedly owned it. It's a precarious structure built on a foundation of pure audacity. The conclusive evidence wasn't a solitary item but an entire collection: forged deeds, an expired notary, a potentially bribed planning commissioner, intimidated witnesses, and a network of shell companies. Beverly Diant hadn't just purloined my land, she had orchestrated a multifaceted conspiracy. The elements were aligning, depicting a scenario of monumental arrogance and criminal activity. And we were merely commencing. The subsequent measure was to formally apprise all implicated parties. Martin, with the dramatic flair he reserved for particularly flagrant cases, composed cease and desist letters that were paragons of legal denunciation. One was dispatched to Beverly Diant, currently lodged in the county jail awaiting bail for her prior infractions, though Martin suspected new, considerably more grave charges were forthcoming. Another was sent to the Whispering Oaks Estates Homeowners Association, care of its last known registered agent, which was, amusingly, a mailbox rental establishment. A third, much more cautiously phrased letter was directed to the CEO of Prestige Pinnacle Homes, notifying them of the catastrophic title imperfection impacting their entire Whispering Oaks development and inviting them to deliberate a mutual strategy against the instigator of the fraud, Miss Beverly Diant. "We desire Prestige Pinnacle on our side, or at least not as an initial opponent," Martin explicated. "They possess substantial resources and a direct interest in witnessing Beverly's downfall. They are likely as aghast as you are, Arthur, purely from a financial standpoint." He also commenced preparing an emergency injunction to cease any further operations on my land. No new sales, no additional construction, no landscaping, nothing. The objective was to immobilize everything until ownership could be unequivocally re-established in court. Meanwhile, Mr. Jones returned from his discussion with Herbert Finley, the retired planning commissioner. Jones was, as customary, subdued. Mr. Finley was initially forgetful, he reported, sipping the tepid coffee I had offered him. But after we reviewed the penalties for perjury and I chanced to mention his recent succession of surprisingly favorable outcomes at the regional poker championships, his recollection improved significantly. He recalled Miss Diant making a very generous campaign contribution in cash to his re-election fund, even though he wasn't seeking re-election shortly before the Whispering Oaks permits were sanctioned. He also remembered her stating that the Blackwood parcel was much larger than it appeared on initial maps. Something concerning old, revised surveys only she possessed access to. He is now exceedingly willing to furnish a sworn affidavit detailing his engagements with Ms. Diant. He appears quite anxious about becoming implicated as a co-conspirator. Martin rubbed his hands together. Excellent. The net constricts. The intelligence regarding Beverly Diant's arrest and the uncertainties surrounding the legitimacy of Whispering Oaks had begun to spread through the small, newly established community. A few courageous or reckless individuals had apparently attempted to contact the HOA office, only to discover it locked and abandoned. Panic was starting to take hold among the inhabitants of the 138 homes. These were individuals who had, in good faith, invested their life savings, acquired mortgages, and relocated their families into what they presumed were legitimate residences. They were casualties too, ensnared in the crossfire of Beverly's avarice. Our subsequent action was a sensitive one, apprising these homeowners. We couldn't simply affix eviction notices to their doors. That was neither my approach nor legally advisable at this juncture. Instead, Martin organized a town hall-style assembly at a neutral location, a local community center, inviting all registered residents of Whispering Oaks Estates. The invitation was meticulously phrased, explaining that critical information concerning the title and future of their properties would be deliberated by legal representatives of Arthur McCoy, the verified owner of the underlying land. The response from Prestige Pinnacle Homes was prompt and foreseeable. Their chief legal officer, a Miss Eleanor Vance, telephoned Martin directly. Her tone was a blend of restrained fury and pragmatic concern. They had undertaken their own hurried internal assessment and had, to their consternation, discovered significant deficiencies in the documentation Beverly Diant had supplied them. The revised surveys Finley had mentioned were absent from Prestige's files, only Diant's assurances and the county-stamped permits. They had been, in their own lawyers' terms, spectacularly deceived. Vance affirmed they were formulating their own multimillion-dollar lawsuit against Beverly Diant and Blackwood Legacy Holdings LLC for fraud, breach of contract, and a roster of other complaints that would likely keep Diant occupied in court for the remainder of her natural existence, assuming she ever exited jail. They also consented to dispatch a representative to our town hall meeting, not to dispute my claim, but to elucidate their stance to the homeowners and to indicate their intent to pursue Diant. This constituted a substantial victory. Having the developer publicly concede the fraud would lend immense credibility to my case and channel the homeowner's justifiable anger towards the genuine offender. The day of the town hall meeting dawned. The community center was filled to capacity. The atmosphere vibrated with apprehension and suppressed rage. I sat alongside Martin at a table at the front, Miss Vance from Prestige Pinnacle Homes a few seats away. Observing the faces in the assembly, young couples, families with small children, retirees, I experienced a twinge of empathy. Their dream homes were constructed upon a foundation of falsehoods, on my pilfered land. Martin commenced by calmly and systematically presenting the facts. My family's enduring ownership, the forged deed, the complicity of the former planning commissioner, Beverly Diant's arrest and criminal record. He displayed copies of my deeds and surveys on a projector, contrasting them with the fraudulent documents employed by Diant. There were gasps, murmurs, and a few incensed shouts, predominantly aimed at the absent Beverly. One man stood, his voice trembling. "So what does this signify for us? Are we all to be evicted from our homes?" Martin raised a hand. "Mr. McCoy is not endeavoring to create 138 homeless families. His contention is with Beverly Diant and the entity she fabricated to commit this fraud. However, the legal actuality is that your homes are constructed on land to which the seller, Blackwood Legacy Holdings, possess no legitimate title. Consequently, the titles you hold to your homes are, at present, invalid." The room erupted. It was bedlam. People shouting, some women weeping. Miss Vance from Prestige Pinnacle then rose. She articulated her company's profound regret and mortification. She stated unequivocally that Prestige Pinnacle had been deluded by Beverly Diant and that they would be pursuing every legal recourse to recover their losses and hold Diant responsible. She also declared that Prestige Pinnacle would immediately suspend all mortgage payments due to them for those who had financed directly and would collaborate with other lenders to seek forbearance for the affected homeowners. This somewhat pacified the situation, but the fundamental fear persisted. It was at that moment I asked Martin if I could address them. I stood up, looking out at the troubled countenances. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice resonating in the abruptly silent room. "This situation is a nightmare. It's a nightmare for me, and I can only surmise what it's like for all of you. You purchased homes in good faith. You were deceived just as I was robbed. My principal objective is not you. It is the individual and the system that permitted this to occur, Beverly Dion and her fraudulent HOA. I desire my land restored, yes, but I also seek justice. And I believe part of that justice involves discovering a method to lessen the harm inflicted upon innocent parties such as yourselves. I delineated a proposal, Martin, and I had deliberated. Once my ownership was legally re-established and Dion's HOA was dissolved, I would be amenable to discussing land leases with the current occupants or potentially even the sale of the individual lots at a fair market value for the land itself, a value untainted by the fraudulent development. This would provide them a route to legitimate ownership or secure tenancy, though it would entail further legal procedures and expenses. It is not a flawless solution, I concluded. There are no simple resolutions when something this egregious transpires. But I am dedicated to collaborating with you and with Prestige Pinnacle to identify the most equitable path forward once the primary fraud is addressed. It wasn't an assurance of a miraculous remedy, but it was a particle of hope, an indication that they weren't merely pawns in a wealthy man's contest. The mood in the room transitioned from sheer panic to a sort of grim resolve. They now had a distinct adversary in Beverly Dion and a landowner who, while resolved to reclaim his rights, was not seeking to further victimize them. The counter-assault was well in progress, and the foundations of Whispering Oaks Estates were disintegrating, both literally and metaphorically. The legal proceedings advanced with surprising celerity, largely because Beverly Dion's defense, if it could be termed as such, was an incoherent jumble of bombast and progressively desperate allegations against everyone from me to Herbert Finley to her own now former Confederates. The sheer volume of evidence was simply insuperable. The forged deed, the lapsed notary, Mavis Doolittle, when located, tearfully admitted to signing a pile of documents for Beverly for a meager sum, conceding she hadn't even verified if her commission was valid and had no notion of the document's purpose. Herbert Finley's incriminating affidavit concerning the campaign contribution and Tom's testimony regarding the intimidation tactics all painted an undeniable tableau. Miss Albright's forensic accounting had traced a convoluted path of funds from initial loans fraudulently procured, as it transpired, using my land as collateral she didn't possess, through Blackwood Legacy Holdings LLC into Beverly's personal accounts, and then out to finance an opulent lifestyle that included payments on a luxury condominium in Miami and a suspiciously large quantity of high-end designer handbags. It materialized that Whispering Oaks Estates was less a community and more Beverly Dion's personal exchequer. The court summarily nullified the quitclaim deed from Silas Blackwood to Blackwood Legacy Holdings LLC. With that solitary decree, the entire legal underpinning for Whispering Oaks Estates dissolved. All ensuing transactions, including the land conveyance to Prestige Pinnacle Homes and the individual plot sales to the 138 homeowners, were declared void. My original title to the entire farm ranch, encompassing the hundreds of acres of the South Pasture, was unequivocally reaffirmed. The judgment against Beverly Dion and her shell company was astounding. She was found liable for damages to me that extended into the millions for the unauthorized utilization of my land, the expense of environmental restoration. Those perfectly manicured lawns and asphalt roads had significantly impacted the native ecosystem, lost revenue from my cattle operation, and punitive damages intended to make an example of her. Prestige Pinnacle Homes secured their own massive judgment against her for fraud and breach of contract, effectively rendering her bankrupt tenfold. The HOA itself was mandated to be dissolved, its assets, which were practically non-existent as Beverly had diverted most of the funds, to be liquidated. As for Beverly's personal destiny, the initial charges for those outstanding warrants were merely the prelude. The district attorney, emboldened by the mountain of evidence we had unearthed, lodged a multitude of new criminal charges, multiple counts of forgery, grand larceny, wire fraud, mail fraud, and even racketeering. Considering the organized character of her enterprise, the last I heard, she was confronting a prison sentence sufficiently long to ensure her next community leadership position would be organizing the prison library book club if she were fortunate. Her lime green pantsuits were substituted with a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The downfall was absolute and not devoid of a certain somber gratification on my part. The aftermath for the 138 homeowners was intricate and distressing, but not without a way forward. True to my commitment, I, through Martin, commenced discussions with each household. Prestige Pinnacle Homes, to their credit, rose to the occasion. They offered to repurchase the now valueless homes from the residents at their original acquisition price, effectively shouldering the financial deficit of the structures they had erected on land they didn't own. This was an immense relief to many, enabling them to recover their investment and secure accommodation elsewhere. For those who desired to remain, and there were quite a number who had become fond of the location despite its contentious beginnings, I offered long-term land leases for their plots at equitable rates, or the option to acquire the land beneath their homes from me directly at a price reflecting raw land value, not the inflated developed lot price they had initially paid. It was a protracted, meticulous undertaking, necessitating new surveys, new legal agreements, and considerable patience from all parties. Some opted to depart, accepting Prestige Pinnacle's buyout. Others elected to stay, becoming my tenants or new landowning neighbors in a highly unconventional manner. The Whispering Oaks Estates sign was removed, replaced by a straightforward wooden one that read McCoy Ranch South Pasture Lots. The HOA was defunct and interred. Reclaiming my ranch was more than just a legal triumph, it was a gradual, continuous process of mending the land itself. The clubhouse was repurposed into a modest agricultural research center in collaboration with the local university. Some of the roads were excavated and reseeded with native grasses. I even succeeded in reintroducing a small herd of longhorns to a segment of the south pasture, their presence a consoling, familiar spectacle. Tom, my ranch hand, was reinstated with full retroactive pay and an apology for my initial unspoken misgivings. He remains a man of sparse words, but the sparkle in his eye has returned. The entire episode imparted several lessons. Firstly, never undervalue the temerity of a resolute swindler, particularly one with a fondness for costly accessories and a disregard for legal proprieties. Secondly, scrupulous record-keeping and a proficient lawyer are invaluable, especially when that value is being actively exploited by someone else on your property. And thirdly, even when confronted with colossal injustice, a path to resolution can exist, and sometimes even a peculiar new form of community can arise from the ruins. It wasn't the return I had imagined 3 years earlier. But in its own chaotic, unforeseen manner, it was a restoration of what was essential: my land, my heritage, and the quiet contentment of witnessing justice, however belatedly, finally dispensed. And that is how I recovered my ranch, inadvertently dismantled a monumentally corrupt HOA, and became the reluctant proprietor of a neighborhood I never intended to create. This whole experience served as a lesson in vigilance, a stark reminder that one cannot afford to be complacent for too long, not even on the most tranquil frontier.